Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build. 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 This time power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I am your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 107 of the Power Company podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. I am currently in the Red River Gorge, where the weather has taken a turn for the better, thank goodness. I've been in this half of the country for a couple of weeks and have only gotten 2 climbing days in, but it looks like smooth sailing from here, so I'm pretty excited about that. Also, in a few weeks, Nate and I will be traveling to Houston, Nate coming home to Houston, for the Bayou City Classic at Momentum Silver Street. It hasn't been announced on their website yet because we're just finalizing details, but after the comp, Nate and I will be doing a group bouldering session and our applied body tension workshop, and we'll also be opening up slots for private sessions soon as well. So watch our social medias, watch Momentum social medias. You'll see those things advertised pretty quickly, I would imagine. Also, if you haven't checked them out yet, don't forget about the core strength and the movement skills ebooks and the new circuit tape. All those things are available on the website, PowerCompanyClimbing.com. Go check them out. If you aren't familiar with today's guest, Dr. Jared Vaggie, then I suggest you go back and listen to episode 88, which is part 1 in this series, in which we dig into his Rock Rehab Pyramid. This episode is part 2 and 3, and we sat down together at CWA, the Climbing Wall Summit, which if you're involved in the training and coaching for climbing world, honestly, you should be considering attending. Or if you're a gym owner, shaper, setter, anything else related to indoors, go. Let me get back on topic here. This conversation was in person. The previous one was done remotely, my only full-length remote episode, and I definitely enjoyed this one much more. You guys can be the judge of that. If you think I should be doing more remote interviews, shoot me a message. Let me know. And if you haven't bought the book already, Climb Injury Free, it's available, and you should do that. There's a link right there in the show notes on your pocket supercomputer. And let's get into this.
Maybe don't know.
If you can find patterns that you use, that you tend to overuse, and you can identify those, then you have a really good chance of preventing those injuries from happening if you can stop them before they start.
This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build
The
power.
CWA has been a little bit crazy, I think, for everybody. Were you up till midnight the other night with everyone else?
I was in bed at midnight.
Okay.
So
I was up till midnight. It was no good.
was this out drinking and having
Yeah,
fun?
this is
or?
like just hanging out down in the showroom, drinking with everybody. Everybody was there still.
I have to be cooler and more social like you are. I'm like back checking emails at 9:30
It's hard,
p.m.
man. It's hard. I need to break away from it. I need to do the emails at 9:30 p.m.
Yeah, right.
We can trade places.
Okay, well, yeah. Tonight I'll have a beer, relax,
All right.
kick back and do an episode.
Cool. So this is part 2, maybe part 3. We'll kind of see how it goes. We're just gonna kind of freestyle, but why don't you kind of tell everybody about you, a little more about who you are, what your background is, what your story is, how you got here.
Okay, yeah, and I've told this story a few times, and I think it's important for people to know the reason that I'm getting into climbing and preventing injuries.
Yeah.
But I ran track in college, and I tore my hamstring muscles.
What'd you do in track?
100 meter, 200 meter.
You were a
and
sprinter.
400. Yeah,
Really?
I was a sprinter.
Awesome.
I was a big fish in a small pond up in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And then I came down. I ran at UC Davis.
There's a big running community in Portland, though, right?
Yeah, huge running community for distance runners.
Yeah.
For sprinters,
Gotcha.
I was one of the better sprinters in the state, but partly because there weren't so many of them.
There weren't any sprinters.
Yeah, but it was good enough to get me into college. And so,
awesome.
But so it was at UC Davis in Northern California. I ran track, and I tore my hamstring like 6 or 7 times, and I was just devastated. So I had to quit my sophomore year, and there was a rock wall on campus, and I just got hooked on climbing as really a mental rehab. Just something athletic to do? Yeah, just something to move my body where I wasn't afraid that if I hit it, because I think climbing was so slow and methodical.
Sure.
That I wasn't afraid I'd hit this top speed and re-injure my leg.
Yep.
And so it was just something I could appreciate body movement, still stay fit, but not have to worry about tearing my hamstring.
Right.
So I got psyched on it, and I started there, and I was climbing just indoors and started going outdoors. Then started climbing sport, then trad, then big walls solo, and then eventually I just quit my job and pursued my lifelong dirtbag dream.
Yeah.
That ended up lasting only 6 months because I got a fellowship position.
I think that's plenty.
Yes, I want to go back to that. I don't think I can ever go back to that stage, but
you can't go back to it quite like that now that you're a doctor and making money.
I was watching like my bank account like slowly dwindle as I'm like sleeping on the couch and
yeah, man,
just doing what I had to do. But anyway, in that whole process, I remember this was a pretty vivid moment. I live in Los Angeles. I was living in Los Angeles. I was going to graduate school at USC. So I was getting my doctorate in physical therapy. And at that stage, I was, kind of newer into climbing. And there was this route called Course and Buggy in Joshua Tree.
Dihedral?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've climbed it.
And there's, I really wanted to do this route. And I was a little bit nervous because the pro's a bit thin.
Yeah.
And so I go up, I stem up this dihedral. I'm getting a little bit of that Elvis legs. I'm not really placing that much pro because I'm trying to get through it. And I get to the exit move. And the context before this, I had climbed 6 days straight. And I was living with my grandma at the time in grad school to save some money. And she had this old house, and the door frames had like the molded door frames on top. And then I didn't have a hangboard. So I was like, literally, I was hanging from my fingers doing pull-ups on these door frames like every night, not resting. And anyway, I was on this route. I pulled really hard, and on the exit move, in one moment, tore my rotator cuff and sprained a ligament in my finger. So
both at the same time.
I was like, and it kind of clicked. I mean, I finished the route. I was psyched on it. But it kind of clicked. And at that time I was getting my doctorate in physical therapy. So I definitely should have known about that.
Right.
As I was rehabbing, I started realizing I should start developing rehab programs and almost started mapping out different body movements and how they relate to injuries for climbers.
Yeah.
And I did that for myself, and then I eventually started putting out in magazines, so in Dead Point magazine and Climbing magazine, and started working with a lot of climbers once I graduated, got my degree, and I went to a residency program and then a fellowship program where I specialized in movement science. And so it was like a 9-year process, basically.
How does movement science look? Is it sport based? Is it just human movement?
It's
like
human
kinetics.
It's
what is
human
it?
movement based. And so basically what this fellowship was, it was a year-long program. And it's every weekend you have these didactic courses on biomechanics and so forth.
Yep.
And the first 6 months, you're seeing patients and you're being mentored by these movement specialists. My main mentor was Claire Franken. She's world known for movement. And you can't touch your patient for the first 6 months.
Oh, really?
Which is, if you think in like a clinical field, like in physical therapy, you cannot touch your patient. And this was part of the fellowship. And so what that really trains you to do is you hone in on visualization, you hone in on abnormal movement patterns, and you can't use the tools that are already sharp in your toolbox. You have to sharpen others.
Right. That's really cool.
Yeah. So that was that process. And I had gone through this movement science process, and it wasn't sports specific like we're thinking, but it's just analyzing just the nuances of human movement.
Yep.
And then I started taking that and applying it to climbing. And I went back and I started teaching at USC. So I'm a professor there now. And I started then kind of merging a lot of what I'm doing into saying, okay, how can I take this expertise and apply it to rock climbing, which at that time when I was going through this, there wasn't a ton out there, or at least if it was out there, it was harder to find.
Yep.
And now there's so much, and you can find everything. And now my big it's almost like a change or a shift. My whole change now is trying to systemize everything.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like, because I do, and I'm just curious what you feel like, do you ever feel like you're contributing to the mass of information that's impossible to sift through out there?
Yeah, I mean, you look up injury prevention climbing, and there's stuff that I wrote like 5-6 years ago that I look back at now. I'm like, I mean, it was fine, but I would probably advance that or edit that or change that.
I was just thinking about that last night, like random moment down in the hall. I was like, oh man, I should go back and change those like 5x5 strength protocols that I was recommending 5 years ago.
Yeah. What are your other regrets of stuff that you've contributed?
Oh man, I can't even tell you. There's a lot of them. Of them.
Yeah. I mean, I'm probably in the same boat, and it's fine that way because we dictate what we do. At least I do is through experience and then through research, and then we make a opinion based on that. Mm-hmm. And it's always changing.
Yeah, totally. So and should be.
Yeah. But yeah, so this whole push has been to try and create systems for specifically preventing injuries. Because you ask any climber now, okay, do you train? And some will train, some won't. The ones that raise their hand that train, they train with the plan. They train with the system. They don't just go in the gym and just randomly hangboard however they feel, or they don't pick up a weight and say, oh, I feel like doing 10 movements today and last time I did 4, whatever it is.
Yep.
So my whole goal is to then say, can we make this whole system then apply it to preventing injuries? And then anytime you have a system, it's more likely that you do it.
Yeah. And it shouldn't just be, let's hope we don't get injured. You're not going to go into the gym and just hope you get stronger. You're going in there planning to get stronger.
Yeah, definitely. And it's even better if you understand your body and you can determine the likelihood of getting certain injuries and then preemptively say, oh, because of how I move, I'm more likely to get inside elbow pain. Well, let me just do these exercises to prevent this inside elbow pain. And I see a lot of climbers, and some of them actually that I see now, and it's becoming more and more, they have no injuries. They're just coming in to say, I want a body blueprint. Can you tell me? Yeah, can you tell me how I can get stronger without getting hurt? And can you tell me what I'm predisposed for? And those are actually a lot of fun.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just sign all of my people up for that through you? Do you have time for that?
Availability now is the issue. Usually my summers are the time I can actually start accepting new clients. And then this summer it's just slammed. So.
Oh, damn it.
But
I was just about to book your July.
We'll talk later. But anyway, so yeah, talking about systems, and this is the second episode that we're doing. Is with the first one we talked about mobility.
Mobility, yeah.
And I guess the background, if no one heard the first episode, I'll kind of briefly describe the...
I think we'll just send them there. I mean, it's out there.
Better, and that'll
just
improve
go
your
there.
hits.
If you haven't,
go listen to the first episode.
Yeah, if you haven't heard it, go do it.
I was going to do a 30-minute recap of what you talked about.
And actually, we in our first conversation, you asked me if I'd ever had a finger injury, and I said no. And then 2 days later, I got my first real finger injury.
Oh no.
So now it's healed, and I'm... it's probably 99% or something.
Yeah.
There's a tiny bit of not pain. There's a tiny bit of, I can feel it when I squeeze it now, but I don't feel it at all when I'm climbing. It's only on touch at this point.
Let's load test it after the episode.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I've got the devices here. So.
Let's do it.
Cool. Okay, yeah. So we talked about mobility, and we talked about the Rock Rehab Pyramid, which is basically my attempt to systemize rock climbing injury prevention and rehabilitation. Yeah. And really how it starts is you have some type of injury. You have this pain, this inflammation, this tissue overload. That's the bottom part of the pyramid.
Yep.
The next part is you lose your range of motion or your mobility. That's the next level. Then you lose your strength. That's the next level. And then you discoordinate your movement. So we're going to talk about the strength part of the pyramid and potentially, if we have time, the movement section.
Yeah. And if we don't have time today, we'll do it the next time I see you.
Yeah, sounds good.
So where do you start with strengthening? And this is post-injury we're talking about. And for me, that was terrifying. I woke up the next morning after this finger injury and thought, I'm fucked. I can't, I'll never climb again. I was immediately panicking, and I called my friend Carrie and was like, we have to have a consultation. I need to know what's going on with my finger. And she started me pretty quickly on a very, very light exercise program with the finger. What's your protocol? How do you know where the hell to start?
Yeah.
I mean, we can't just jump on a hangboard and see what happens.
Yeah, there's a couple things you have to keep in mind. And one thing is everything's on a case-by-case basis, right? Sure. And that's the it depends answer.
Yep,
which is,
totally.
I mean, seemingly...
It's my favorite answer.
Yeah, so you're like, that's kind of a cop-out. But, it depends. But the first thing you have to think about is stages of healing. So you have to bear in mind that your first 14 days of any type of injury is an inflammatory process. Mm-hmm. So that's an acute stage. Mm-hmm. Then up to 3 months is your subacute stage. Okay. And then 3 months on is your chronic stage of any time that you have an injury. And, we think about this pyramid we talked about, this pain, inflammation, tissue overload. Mm-hmm. That's typically going to be your first 2 weeks.
Right.
Some people, they keep re-aggravating it. Sure. So they're in this constant cycle. But what do you do to rehabilitate for that? Well, that's probably a whole nother episode and a whole nother discussion is, okay, do you prevent inflammation or do you not? Do you unload the tissues? Do you not? Right. And those are all those debates. But once you get past that and you're moving on, is really you need to regain your range of motion. Right. And so typically for finger injuries, you need to regain your motion first in the positions that you're going to climb in, which are typically going to be, open hand and crimp positions. Yep. But then your entire range of motion of fully going into almost like
being able to touch the pads down.
Touch the pads into that claw position. Yep. And I rarely initiate strength unless someone's gone through 2 weeks of just pure range of motion exercises.
Gotcha. Question for you really quickly. And I don't experience swelling after an injury. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't happen to me. Yeah. When I had my wisdom teeth pulled, I didn't swell at all. When I've gotten injured, I don't swell at all. The finger felt like early in the morning when I woke up the next day, I couldn't move it. But by an hour later, I seemed to have full range of motion. Mm-hmm. So is there an actual, is that a true thing, or am I just imagining that I don't swell after an injury?
Well, yeah, everyone has different responses. So the easiest way to think about it, fingers are a little tricky because they're harder to see swelling, right? And you can have interdigital swelling, or you can have swelling in the joints or so forth that don't really come too much. But the easiest thing to think about, 2 people roll their ankle. One, giant balloon. Right. The other, not too much swelling.
Yeah, mine doesn't swell.
The third one, discoloration. The same amount of ligament injury in all 3 of them. Right. So you can maybe theorize, well, that may be a good thing, or it may potentially be not so good. Right. The good thing, well, you probably are going to be able to skip that range of motion step quicker than most people because swelling is going to limit your finger range. Right. The not so good thing, well, swelling is sending inflammatory mediators to heal. Right. So potentially the long-term healing process may be blunted, but you get to climb quicker.
Which is a win.
Yeah, that's a win. So for example, once you can regain that range of motion and spending at least 2 weeks doing those exercises, is then you enter in the strength phase. But I don't start people with finger flexor strengthening until at least 8 to 12 weeks. Okay. And finger flexor strengthening, or for those listening, is basically anything that involves flexing your fingers into a grip under a significant enough load to generate pain. Right. But finger extensor strengthening, you can start that pretty quickly after your injury. And so those are the antagonist muscles that antagonize our gripping. And if you look at an ultrasound, or you look at like a real-time ultrasound on when someone's gripping, our finger and wrist extensors co-contract anytime that we grip. So the more stable and the stronger they are, actually the better your grip is going to be. Right. So that's why when we crimp, our wrist cocks back about 30 degrees. Part of it's the orientation of the hold. Yep. But when they've done research on this, people self-selected grips. The strongest grips is when the wrist is cocked back about 35 degrees. And the fingers, if you look at that orientation as well, as you flex forward, that puts some that puts some tension then on the tendons in the back too.
Right.
So anyway, so with strengthening, you can go to town with starting to do those antagonistic strengthening exercises with the rubber band.
Okay.
But I find that people dose those and do them incorrectly more than they do them correctly.
Okay.
And so I find that, I mean, they're usually okay. They're doing something. But it's almost now my new pet peeve is, it used to be like static stretching 5 minutes before someone got on a route, like
Right.
stretching their finger backwards was like all the fad like 7 years ago. And I'd like walk around the climbing gym wanting to like slap people. But now I see people like using these resistance bands. I'm like, oh, it's probably not the right way to do it, or not the most optimal way to do it.
Okay.
So when we talk about strengthening, maybe how you do it is pretty important, not necessarily
How do you suggest
what you
doing
do.
it?
Okay, so most people take the resistant band, and we're talking about like you go to the grocery store, you find some broccoli.
Like on the broccoli.
Yeah, you buy the broccly.
Yeah,
and then
eat the broccoli.
You eat the broccoli and you take the band. You don't steal it from the store. And then they take that rubber band, they put it around their fingertips, and they just hold it almost like in a pinch position.
Right, right.
And so I look at that, I'm like, oh, that's great. That's good. You're training your finger extensors to stabilize your fingers while you're in a pinch.
Right.
And that's good if your entire climb that you're doing is like a pinch marathon.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're crimping or using open hand or any of those varietal grips, you may not be doing the most effective thing for that. So that's one of my pet peeves is, I wouldn't say a pet peeve, but it's like they're on the right track, but it just needs to be a little bit better. Because if they can diversify into doing it while in a crimp position.
Okay, so we need to somehow... So a band probably wouldn't work. You probably need something that hooks onto your fingers at this point.
The coolest way to do this, actually, one thing is a single band is easy. Because you go into like a half crimp position.
Yeah.
And you take a single band, you put it around the distal or the end tip of your finger, and you pull down, you just hold that isometrically. And so the band's pulling down towards your palm, and you're just lifting your fingers without moving them up away from the band.
Are you doing just one finger at a time?
This one
Does that work better?
So this is where it took me a while to figure this one out. I used to try it with all fingers.
Right.
And your fingers like bunch up.
Right.
And they bunch and you're like, this sucks.
You
like
get in like bird beak position.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you get bird beak. Oh, I like that. Can I use that?
Totally.
I'll quote you.
That's what it's
I'll
called.
say, is it really?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you get in this bird beak position, and it's just it's suboptimal. You shouldn't do it that way.
Yeah.
And so one way to do it is you take a single band, you put about one finger, and you pull down. But another way that I developed, which is really cool, is you take a carabiner and you girth hitch three bands to the carabiner. Mm-hmm. And the carabiners are really cool because they taper off as they get lower, and so do our fingers.
Right.
And so you hook 3 bands, girth hitch them around the carabiner, go into a half crimp position, pull the carabiner down towards your palm.
Right.
And then now you've got and you can even take a sling, tie it to the carabiner, loop it around your elbow, and now you can walk around town in a half crimp position, just rocking it out and strengthen your finger extensors.
This is why you didn't hang out in the hall until midnight.
This is why I did not hang out in the hall. Got some cool party tricks though.
No, totally. I think that's a great, refinement to something that we all try and do as a preventative measure, as a strengthening measure.
Yeah, and even though, think about that, it's your half crimp, we'll just go into an open hand. And you can do a similar thing. You just have to change the angle of pull to not be directly down, just to be a little bit more outwards.
Yep.
So that's one of my pet peeves with, and I'm not even going to call it strengthening exercise. I'm going to call it a muscle performance exercise for the finger extensors. Part of I'll just a quick tangent. So in my book, as we go through this Rock Rehab Pyramid, there's your pain, your tissue overload, and your inflammation that's one level. You have your mobility, the next one. And then the third one is strength. I actually wanted to call it muscle performance and motor coordination.
Right.
It just didn't fit in the box and was 2-word jumbly. And so it's called strength. So please forgive me on that. But no one's called me on that yet, which is...
I think you have to dumb it down. And dumb it down is not the right word, but that's the common word. You have to make it easily digestible.
Yeah, or choose words that fit in the margins of a pyramid. If strength was if that was at the bottom, we would have been fine.
Yeah,
but we would have had to reinvent that pyramid. But so anyway, in this position, that's one of my semi pet peeves. The other one is the duration of hold.
Okay.
So if you think about it, so Chris, this is interesting. I like asking climbers this. So if you're on a boulder problem, how long do you think you typically will be on a hold?
Most people say around 7 seconds, but
Okay.
really depends.
All right,
It depends. That's the answer.
Oh, it depends. Good cop out. And most people, you don't even qualify as yourself. Other people say 7 seconds.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything.
All right. Sport climbing. How long?
Oh, longer for sure. If you're me, more like 15 to 20 seconds per hold.
All right. And then if you're trad climbing.
Oh gosh, if you're trad climbing, you don't even grab holds. You ignore the holds and you hand jam all the time.
No, we're not talking Indian Creek trad. We're talking a sport climber trying to trad climb.
Generally longer.
Yeah. So if you take this in context, then you think about it. All right, if you're going to train a boulder problem, and I say bouldering is maybe your 5-6 seconds or whatever we say, but let's say you're bouldering, let's just say 7 seconds. So then you're going to want to hold your injury prevention exercise for the same duration of the modality of climbing that you're doing. So you're going to want to hold that crimp position with the resistance band for your 7 seconds or however long for bouldering. If you're sport climbing and you're like, oh man, I sport climb, I'm always taking 15 seconds on a hold. Well, you probably want to train those finger extensors for 15-second increments. And if you're trad climbing, well, I don't know.
Forever.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're going to have to do it in the hand jam position.
Yeah. So that's interesting. It doesn't relate directly to reps as you would think of them.
No, because we're not going to fatigue. If we're going to fatigue, like you're in the gym and you're doing shoulder, like lateral raises with your shoulder, right? And you're trying to build up your deltoid muscle and you're doing 6 repetitions of heavy weight and you're fatiguing at that 6th one. Right. Great. You're strength training. If you're taking a rubber band and pressing your fingers against it, this is motor coordination training. This is just training your brain to turn on.
See, the strength screwed me up. You're going to have to change it.
I know, right? It's throwing curveballs. Well, wait for the 2nd edition of the book. There's going to be in 5 years. But no, yeah. So it's so this motor coordination or this muscle performance, all we're doing is we're wiring the neurons to fire the way we want to do it on the wall. Okay. And another trick that I have people do is when we're trying to train those antagonistic muscles, you can also do it on a rock climbing hold. So if you go up on a hold or even on a hangboard, if you sink your weight into let's say you're on a hangboard, this will be easier. Okay. And you're just on a crimp on the hangboard and you sink your weight into it. So your finger flexors are working really hard. Whoever's listening to this now, next time you're at the gym or if you're at the gym now, you can try it. Try and selectively lift each finger up while you're loading. And maybe, try that right now. Lock down on that table and then lift your ring finger. Come on, Chris. Lift. Oh, there you go. You cheated there. You moved your wrist back. Cheated. You unloaded. So if whoever's listening now, like we're sitting at the Embassy Suites in in a hotel room and he's grabbing onto the side of what is this?
I don't know what that is. Some piece of furniture. Crimping down, and he actually did pretty good. Was able to selectively lift that ring finger, but it's hard to do. And so if you think about it, well, it's not that natural. It's a little bit contrived, but that's the way that you can selectively turn on your finger extensors in the most specific position to climbing. Okay, so it doesn't have to be loaded. You don't have to be pulling against a load in that.
No, you're not pulling. Position. You're not pulling against the load at all. Okay. You're flexing against the load with your other fingers, and now you're just selectively lifting. And if you try this, anyone tries this, you can do it on the molding of a door frame and just go to the top, crimp your fingers around, and then just pretend like you're playing piano and slowly lift each finger. It is hard to do.
Well, it's interesting. I was making a video last week of different matching techniques, and a popular and one of the most useful matching techniques is piano matching, where you lift a finger, replace it with a finger from the other hand. Yeah. And you continue to do that. And I was trying to do it on my 45-degree wall on a small enough hold that I had to do it. And it was so difficult to not only support myself with, a different finger from each hand progressively, but just the coordination to pick the right finger up and then replace it with another finger, and then pick a finger up and replace it with another finger.
And it may not, like you're saying, it may not necessarily be getting your other hand onto the hold, but it may just be the nature of unloading a single finger.
Yeah.
So it's funny you do that. It's cool that you do that as an exercise, because as maybe a motor coordination exercise on the wall.
Yep.
Because in the clinic, I do that all the time I have these things, gripsters, or basically they're like, molded holds that you can hook then to a pulley device.
Yep.
And so I'll have climbers then squat down into a position, almost like they're climbing, pull into it, and then basically just independently lift each finger, just like you're saying now, because they're not ready to then do that under a full load.
Right.
So it's hard.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. My office manager was filming, and she was just laughing at me because I just kept falling off.
That's when you need outtakes. Do you have any outtakes for that stuff?
I bet I do. I should put them together.
Oh, yeah. People would love that.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. So, so then on the topic of, we're on the fingers and strengthening the finger extensors. I think that for me, at least, the take home, all right, once you strengthen these finger extensors and you've gone through a timeline of at least 8 to 12 weeks, then you got to be strengthening your finger flexors somehow, or else you're going to get disuse, you're going to get atrophy, and you're not going to load them properly when you climb.
Right.
And I've been playing around the past 4 years with different protocols because there's not that much out there on this. Esther Smith, who's a doctor of physiotherapy,
Salt Lake.
She's done an awesome job on getting information on how to, I think she called it like remodeling the tendons. Her protocol is awesome. It's really good. Courage Climbers, I think it's Hang Right article to go and check that out. But yeah, past 4 years I've been playing with this stuff with load testers and with different climbers and athletes and trying to find the right fit. And I've developed a program or a system with it that works pretty well, where it's a little different for the first 4 weeks than what people are used to, and then it gets you slowly into normally loading the finger.
Right.
So if you think about, like, when you hangboard, what are your hang times normally, or what do you?
I mean, it varies depending on the cycle that I'm in. So it's hard to say whether I'm doing max hangs or minimum edge depth hangs or more like a repeater workout.
What's the longest you've hung on a hangboard on a crimp, let's say, for a part of like a training cycle?
Oh gosh, I would regularly, I would say the longest hangs are 10 seconds.
Okay. Yeah. So typically, 10 seconds is a long hang. 7-second parameters is, kind of getting into your repeaters. And basically, when this system that I developed for the basically remodeling or the returning to load your finger flexors, I think is a better, or the terminology that I use for it, is you're doing 30-second hangs.
Okay.
Do you have any idea why the first 4 weeks we're doing 30-second hangs?
Just bigger holds, so less load on the pulley?
Yeah, so the whole goal is, we're increasing the volume but decreasing the intensity, or increasing the duration, decreasing the intensity.
Right.
And so for these hangs, when you're reintroducing, trying to hang on to load the finger tendons and to have them adapt to the stimulus, you want to be able to generate just a little bit of pain, just because you're going to have to return to climbing. You're going to have to remodel those tissues.
Right.
And you have to have a little bit of irritation in a sustained, controlled environment to then, unleash on the wall.
Gotcha.
And so anyway, I don't know if we don't have to go in depth into the protocol. But
Is there a place they can find your protocol online?
Well,
it's in the book, right?
It's in the newest version of the book.
Newest version.
So that one will be out probably by the time this one airs, because we're almost out of books again, which is a blessing and a curse.
It's a good problem.
I mean, the good problem is I keep like tweaking little things as we go. But yeah, there's that protocol. There's a new protocol in there in the book for hang times, but it's basically the first 4 weeks is 4 sets of 30 seconds, and then it goes down to you have your 3 sets of 7, or you have your 7-second hangs and 3 sets.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
cool. So is there some sort of like takeaway philosophy or idea that we can also apply to elbows, shoulders, knees? I
think the huge takeaway should be that if you pay attention, I'll put two. And one is because we're talking a lot about strength, and the other is just my passion for movement. But if you pay attention to your technique and your movement on the wall, you videotape yourself climb and you have someone look at it, a climbing coach, a movement expert, a doctor of physical therapy, anybody. And if you can find patterns that you use on harder routes that you tend to overuse, and you can identify those, then you have a really good chance of preventing those injuries from happening if you can stop them before they start. Right. So for example, if you are really good at crimping.
I think that's the obvious place to start. I get a lot of videos from people who, as soon as they get on harder things, are crimping every hold.
Yeah, exactly. And so you see that all the time. And they're really good at crimping, and you probably don't have to crimp every single hold. You may just have to crimp the crux. And you may want to vary your selection of crimping between a full, a close, a half crimp, and make it situational based. And if you know that, well, you're probably going to develop, if you over crimp it a lot, you're going to develop either a pulley injury or flexor tendon strain, or you're going to develop outside elbow pain. Because you have to extend your wrist backwards to crimp. So just do the preventative exercises for those. If you love slopers, if you just rock it on slopers, well, you're probably going to develop inside elbow pain. So you'll do preventative exercises for those. So, So if you know how you move, and there's so many, I love climbing because coaches are experts on movement. It's, I can talk to a climbing coach and we can both learn, in that communication. And there's other sports where I don't think it's the coaches are experts in movements, or maybe experts in the mechanics of the sport or the technique, but not in full body movement.
Right. Climbing's movements are exponentially more than any other sport I've ever been involved in, except for maybe gymnastics.
True. Yeah. Gymnastics is tricky because it's actually also, it's sustained repetitive movements on the same apparatus.
Right.
I worked with U.S. men's gymnastics at the Olympic Training Center this past summer, or in June. And man, the amount of burns they have on the same exact apparatus with the same body positions versus climbers. Maybe they're on the same problem, but they're doing it differently all the time. So we have less of a chance for injury risk just because of our variety.
Sure.
But yeah, so going back to take home message, I think one is just analyze your movement and either film it, have someone watch it, and start to create an identity of what moves you use, and maybe use some of the drills that you have, right? That you're developing to then fill in the gaps of movement. And then the other is the specificity of the exercise. Is a lot of climbers do an injury prevention exercise just to do it. And they're like, oh, I know that I should be taking a rubber band and flicking it. And I think that's awesome. And I see that and I'm like, all right, you get points. You get points for taking a step towards injury prevention. But you kind of get bonus points if you do it in a more specific position like we talked about. And if you then talk about the shoulder, well, I see climbers a lot of times doing T's, Y's, and L's, which is really good. So they're getting bonus points for that, but they forget to do strength exercise to strengthen what's serratus anterior, which is pushing into the ground. And that's actually the muscle that stops you from winging. You go into a push-up and you just push. So yeah, I think a take home would be if you can know your movement, you can be specific with your exercise, you can just do this stuff 5 minutes a day, you can prevent a lot of injuries from happening.
So question for you, just based on this, idea of progressively strengthening, and not just doing random exercises that you've been told are good antagonist or good injury prevention exercises. Something that's become really popular that I'm somewhat conflicted about and would love to know your opinion on are things like using bands for shoulder work, for internal and external rotation for shoulder work. Where do you stand on the effectiveness of that as injury prevention?
Well, first, before I answer that, tell me your challenges with it.
Okay. I liked, after I injured my shoulder, I felt like it was really challenging for me coming back. And at that point, it felt like something I should be doing. because it was difficult for me. And it did create that little bit of pain, as you called it, remodeling tissue, and it felt effective. And again, I'm going all by feel here. It's how
100%.
how I operate.
Yeah.
And it felt effective. Now that the shoulder is strong again, it doesn't feel like it's doing much or as much as if I'm doing overhead presses and heavier exercises and, actually strengthening my shoulder.
That totally makes sense. Yeah. So what it sounds like is in the initial stages, you were probably weak, and the bands allowed you to strengthen because of the load.
Right.
And now when you use bands, you feel like you're going through the motion, and
totally.
Then you grab the dumbbells and you're like, oh, now I'm challenging myself.
Yeah.
So what I'd say with that is I rarely prescribe true strength exercises unless there is a muscle, like a true deficit in strength that we've been able to tell and go back and forth. I dynamometer each side of the body, and okay, there's a difference there. What's the big change that I notice and why I like bands a lot is I use them more for muscle activation.
Okay.
And so I'll have climbers, let's say for example, your goal is to turn on the muscles in the back of your shoulder. Because when you climb, your shoulders round forward, and when they're back, they allow you to be more stable. So let's say that's your goal, right? So before you climb, if you go and take a bunch of dumbbells and you fatigue at 6 to 8 reps,
right,
and then you go climb, you're probably going to have suboptimal movement. The muscles won't be strong because they're fatigued, and that's maybe detrimental to what you're doing. Now, if you go and you take bands, you go through the same exact positions, or even light weights, but something at a low resistance just to preheat the oven or turn it on and activate that muscle prior, not to fatigue, but just enough to turn it on and then go climb. Well, the muscle's not fatigued anymore. It's just woken up, and then it allows you to get on the wall. So I find more effectiveness if you're doing band exercises non-fatigue or not to fatigue, that just do them right before you climb as part of your warm-up.
Gotcha. So something more like you were just talking about, doing eyes wise tees, something like that with a little bit of weight or a band, makes total sense to get that activation happening, to get you ready to move in the right way. Similar to like a wall slide. With lift off, that kind of thing. I feel like that helps me move in the right way. But what about the things like the internal, external rotation, where your elbow's at your side, and you're just turning your arm? So
that was like, basically that's a really good exercise if you need to reach a mouse at your computer. Right?
Okay.
So you're sitting down. No, this is real. This is true. Like you're sitting down and you have an office worker, right? And they have to get to that mouse. And oh no, I can't reach that mouse. They're externally rotating towards it. That's a great exercise. Or it's a good exercise for people that cannot train their rotator cuff in more demanding positions.
Right.
But if you can do that and you can do 3 sets of 10 of that, you should probably progress it. And to progress it, to make it climbing specific, what do you think you would do with like your elbow?
I mean, my elbow's never at my side while I'm climbing.
Yeah, so
unless I'm in an undercling in a very rare situation.
Yeah, so you want to advance or progress that. So you would do your internal and external rotations, which are basically just moving your arm so your shoulder rotates in and out. But you would do that with your elbow at the level of your shoulder.
Okay. And
then the bonus points is, well, can you squat down a little bit and put some weight into your legs as you do that? Because that's likely how you're going to look when you climb. And then the even better bonus is, can you lock in that position with your arm, let's say, rotated outwards, and your elbow at the level of your shoulder and the band facing in front of you, if that paints a picture.
Right. So you're pulling back on the band.
Yeah, so you're pulling back on the band, you're squatting down, lock that in, and then just bring your arm up and down.
Okay.
And then now you're turning on the same exact external rotators. You're doing it through a range of motion, and you're doing it in something that mirrors or is really specific towards climbing. Some people can't do that, and it's too much demand. So those are the people that are hopefully, they're doing something lower demand with their elbow at their side until they can get to that level. But if you're climbing on the rock wall and you're climbing at least 5'10", you should probably be able to get your elbow above your shoulder and rotate outwards on a band.
Sure.
So I wrote an article maybe like 5 years back on like how annoyed I am with these like elbow at your side external rotation.
Yep.
And I've come a little bit full circle back towards them saying it's okay if you're not strong enough to sustain like higher level positions, just because I see a pain population, or I see people that have pain and it hurts when they get their elbow up. But if it feels fine with your elbow up and you can get into that position, I'm okay with that. And I actually think it's advantageous to do that prior to climbing to preheat the muscles. I don't know if I've told this story on air before. I tell it a lot in my clinics, but I work with a lot of different Olympic athletes and Olympic teams. And I was down in China. This was 2 years ago with the Chinese national team and their Olympic track and field team. And this is probably the top number 5, 6, 8, and 9, like top long jumpers in the world.
Okay.
I was working with, and they were on the track, basically getting warmed up to long jump. And I see their coach over there, and prior to this trip, as I mentioned, I'm a professor at USC, and we have a lot of pretty distinguished faculty. And one of our faculty, Dr. Chris Powers, any research you look up on the knee, his name's likely going to be there. And he's done a lot of research for this. And what he's shown is when the knee collapses or dives inwards, it puts a lot of stress on the knee. And if you strengthen the hip muscles, and it pulls the knee into a better alignment. And he has this protocol where you basically take a resistance band, you press against it, you hold it for about 30 seconds to a minute at a sub-maximal level to almost preheat or activate these muscles.
Okay.
And so I go to China and I have this in my head, and I see these long jump athletes on the track with these bands around their knees before they're about to go through their practice, and they're pulling out on them and doing these positions. So I go up to the head coach, Randy Huntington, which is this huge guy. He was the coach of world record holder Mike Powell. He's like well known in track.
Yep.
He goes, and I tell him, I'm like so excited. I'm a young guy, right? And I go up to him, like a big smile on my face. I'm like, yo, you've been looking at all this research from USC. I'm so excited that you're implementing this in your warm-ups. And he goes, he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, listen, kid, I've been doing this since the 80s. That's before you were born.
Yeah.
And I just say that because, this stuff's been around for so long.
Right.
And even just muscle activation exercises, just pressing out against something. It doesn't even have to be a band. You can take your arm and press it against a wall, right? And just turn it on at a low level sustained before you do your activity. I mean, that stuff's been around for a long time. It's just now finally there's starting to be a little bit of research, and then it's getting closer and closer to becoming integrated within different sport.
Yeah. Quick total aside here, but how do you feel about things like that? I feel like I've seen so often anecdotal evidence come from coaches or athletes who've figured out that something works long before the scientific community understands why it works. And there's definitely a group of people who will argue till their death that if there's no science backing it, it doesn't work. And I think that's totally wrong. There are so many examples like you just mentioned.
Yeah, science is 10 to 15 years behind. That's like any research paper you read that was 15 years ago or 10 years ago is probably what's being implemented now. Like, for example, dynamic warm-ups. Even 8 years ago, I was teaching clinics. Not many people knew about dynamic warm-ups, or much less now. Now I teach a warm-up clinic. Maybe 2 people out of 20 don't know what a dynamic warm-up is.
Right.
And so that was something that's been around for 20 years in research, right? So muscle activation is one of those things that's starting to become more popular in research, and it'll become more popular in climbing. Like the gymnasts do it all the time. You watch them warm up, and they're doing all their work before they get onto those things. But the way I look at it, it's basically, if you look at a Venn diagram, there's like 3 different circles. You have evidence-based practice. So basically the research.
Yep.
You have the person that you're working with, whether this is a coach, whether it's a physical therapist, a chiropractor, whatever, you have their perceptions, and then you have your own biases.
Gotcha.
And you got to be able to mix all 3 of those. So for example, like for you, if we set you up on a program where you're doing like TheraBands every day for like an hour, and the research supported that.
I wouldn't last long.
The research supported it, and I told you, no, like, Chris, you got to do that. no, that other circle is not really, not
Right.
really working. Your individual perception biases aren't working.
Yep.
So in the end, you have to find something that really meshes with all those. And research is just 1/3 of the picture.
Okay, cool. That's a really cool way to look at it. I like that a lot, actually, because I get into these arguments with people pretty consistently.
If you want the article, I'll send you. There's actually an article where the American Physical Therapy Association developed this as a practice model. And
Oh, yeah, I would love it. Then I can just forward it to people.
Yeah, exactly. You can say, read this. This is research-based.
Read this and talk to me later.
I just realized I just tapped on the table, which was like one of the no-nos that like you talked about
You can do it now.
before.
You can bang on the table all you want because we don't have stands.
Yeah, so
It's all good.
a little context too, we're holding mics with our hands,
Yeah.
and your biceps are probably getting really developed after all these interviews. Your brachioradialis and your biceps.
That's my whole plan, Jared.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is all
I'm
training.
I'm actually fatiguing. My biceps are fatiguing as I have to like go right hand and left hand as we're talking.
That's hilarious. So when we're strengthening, we get full range of motion, we strengthen, and we're strengthening specifically based on our movement biases, our patterns, and making sure we don't have holes in our movement, right? Mm-hmm. Once we move on to that next tier of the pyramid, which is movement, how do you define that? When I first saw it, to be totally honest, when I saw the pyramid and movement was at the top of it, I rolled my eyes and was like, oh God, here's another person trying to tell us that we all need to move in a very specific way, and we're all wrong. And Adam Ondra doesn't know how to move because he's moving all wrong,
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily your approach. So.
No, and I think it comes down to there's two ways to look at it. There's efficient movement and inefficient movement. Mm-hmm. And then there's movement that can cause specific muscle overload, and there's movement that can cause specific muscle unload.
Okay.
So for example, what would be an example, like I'll put it on you, because what would be an example of a efficient versus non-efficient movement pattern that you'd like commonly see with climbers?
I mean, that's a really tough question because it varies so much. But
let me then like kind of almost like bias the question.
Okay.
Let's say they're roof climbing.
If they're roof climbing, definitely they shouldn't be, pulled up, biceps super engaged, chest as close to the roof as they can be. That's going to be extremely inefficient compared to hanging as much as they can.
Yeah,
or straight armed as much as they can.
Exactly. So that's like, and that's, that's a specific one we can like, okay, most of us can agree that a inefficient movement pattern when you're on a roof is flexing your elbows quite a bit and letting your butt sag really far from the wall.
Yep.
An efficient movement pattern is to likely get your hips right over your toes and your elbows at almost like a very micro bend, but still straight, and your shoulder blades slightly engaged. But I would backtrack and say maybe what's more efficient in that position is not your shoulder blade slightly engaged, is actually your shoulder blade slightly disengaged.
Okay.
Because you're using your muscles when your shoulder blades are slightly engaged, and you may burn or run out of steam. So that's your efficient versus non-efficient. If we take that same pattern and we say from a muscle injury standpoint, your most efficient movement pattern of allowing your shoulder blade to sag just a little bit
is a little more dangerous.
Is actually a little bit more dangerous. Exactly. And so it's this constant battle. And that's why I wanted to include movement in the book, is I'm not saying that every climber has to move in this most optimal way. You look at Adam Ondra climb and you're like, oh man, like he's probably going to get hurt. And then you realize he's the most resilient. He has the most resilient body out of anyone. And you're like, how does he do that? Those are all efficient movement patterns, but they're probably putting high strain on areas of his body.
Right.
But he's resilient and he can handle it. Now, if you're a climber and you're having shoulder pain, you may have to say, well, I may have to do a slightly inefficient movement pattern of engaging my shoulder blades to make my shoulder feel better, not have that pain, that will allow me to be stronger, and then I can pull through.
Yeah.
So it's this constant battle, and there's in any sport or in any movement, there's not a right or wrong way. Think about squatting. You have 25 people squat. A lot of them are going to squat differently.
Right.
Someone may squat with a wide base and their hips rotate outwards. And they'll have someone telling them, oh, keep your knees in and keep your toes forward.
Right.
But they may have what's called
anatomically, they just can't do it.
Yeah, they may have what's called retroverted hips, where they're actually their femurs, the head of their femur is rotated slightly in the socket, where their neutral position is actually with their hips rotated out. And those are the same people that are sitting cross-legged with one leg always rotated out, kind of like you're doing now.
Yep. This is uncomfortable for me, actually.
Okay. You're shoved in that position. And those are the same people that have more rotation outwards and inwards. And for them, well, your most efficient movement pattern is going to be legs rotated outwards. Although that could put some certain strains on the body.
Right.
And you're going to have to battle that. So I think when it comes to movement, the goal of what was in the book was to say, listen, we have a finger injury. What are the positions that are going to put the highest amount of stress on that finger injury? We have an outside elbow injury. What are the positions that are going to put the most amount of stress on that? Be aware of that. Monitor it. Don't do those positions all the time. And then when you're climbing your crux move on your problem, or if you're climbing hard stuff, just climb. Like, just enjoy the body movement, and you don't have to think about it too much.
Yeah, I think that's the really important distinction for me, is that if I want to practice good movement patterns, great. When I go to perform, that all goes out the window for me. And I have to be able to distinguish between practice and performance. I might be going up my project. That doesn't mean it's performance time. And it doesn't mean every burn should be I'm crimping the little hold and I'm, putting my shoulder into this dangerous position. But when it's time to send, maybe I do make that concession and I take that risk and understand the consequences. But I'm not going to do it every single time I go up there and try the move,
Yeah, and that's the important message we should be sending to climbers. And I think it's disadvantageous to think too much when you're trying to do something hard.
Right.
And probably, detrimental to your performance versus just letting go and doing what your body's comfortable doing.
Right.
And normally I'll tell climbers when they're focusing on movement patterning to do it as their warm-up. And that, like the drills that you talk about, all those things, that becomes your warm-up program. You're imprinting that into your brain, and then just climb. Yeah,
that's exactly what all our drills are. If we want someone, I'll use myself as an example. Because I started as a trad climber, I started as a Red River endurance climber. I was really slow, sloth-like. It would take me twice the amount of time to climb a pitch as someone else. But I put a lot of value into precision and moving really well and looking good while I climbed, And to me, moving dynamically and jumping around didn't look good. And it was out of control. And I put no value on that. Once I started to understand the value of moving dynamically and started to understand that it could still be in control and it looked good, I practiced it a lot. And always in my warm-ups. And gradually over time, it would get to a little more difficult climbs. And it finally got to the point where on my projects, I would find myself using momentum even when I didn't need to. And then I had to learn to back it down. But it always starts, that movement practice or that, learning efficient movement, whichever it is, always has to start at the very low end.
Yeah, it helps me, or it's nice to hear there's, at least between the two of us, a consensus of, no, this is what is recommended at least. It just gives you so much freedom to do what you want when you climb. I think that's part of climbing, is just understanding your body, breaking new sequences, learning that stuff. And if you're always so precise about every single component when you're climbing hard stuff, then I think you lose that.
Yep, totally. And it's good to hear you acknowledge that when we are performing, some of those good practices go out the window. I think it's that case. I think that's the case with every sport.
100%.
Every Olympic gymnast knows that if he's in a Maltese cross, it's dangerous, and he could get injured that way, but he's going to do it for the sake of competing in his sport, So I think we have to understand those risks, understand those consequences, and make our choices. But be able to put into practice good choices while we're not at that ultimate performance level.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. When you said something really interesting to me yesterday about movement, that when you're doing your consults, you watch a climber's movement and determine their predispositions for certain injuries.
Yeah, that's like the most fun I have is being Sherlock Holmes. I like tough cases. I like things where I have to or even like House, right? Where you have to be like, all right, let me figure this out.
Yeah.
But you need to be able to do that if you have all the data. And to have all the data, what I need, and this is from my experience or my training, is I need to see how the person moves in regular movements. So for example, let's say there's a shoulder injury and their shirt is off or rolled up, or see their shoulder blades, and I watch them reach their arm up overhead. And I watch their shoulder blade. I watch the timing of the movement. I watch the quality of the movement. I watch to see if there's any deviations. So that's step one. I get footage of them climbing. I watch when they climb, how they reach. Next, I get them on hands and knees on the ground. I watch them almost think of like a plank position, and then you bend your knees.
Okay.
And I watch them squat back and forth. So basically like their arm is going over their head while they're in a plank position. Almost kind of like, think of like a child's pose, but a little bit more loaded.
Like knees not on the ground.
Yeah, child's pose with the knees off the ground type thing. And then they're going into like a tabletop.
Right. So almost like a low bear. Are you familiar with low bear?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So watching that and watching the same movement, right? And then I put them in a position that they would do on the wall on the ground. So I'll have them do, let's say, like a flag. And I'll watch them go into that same position. And I'll start to correlate things. So for example, let's say someone has left-sided shoulder pain. And I watch them do the flag. And they're bringing their right leg out to the side. They're balancing on their left leg and their left hand is out. And I see their leg wobbling. And I say, tell me the history, and I do on the other side, there's no wobble. So tell me the history of your lower leg. Well, they've been bouldering for years. They've rolled their ankle 6 or 7 times.
Right.
So you have 6 or 7 times you rolled that left ankle. And when you balance on that left side, your leg is going...
instability there.
Exactly. Your leg's going all over the place, and now your arm is, is now unstable. Well, is that why you have your shoulder pain? That's my question. I always ask that. So then I see them when they are on the rock wall. I see when they do that position, what happens. And then I watch when they're just lifting their arm. Well, when they lift, does their shoulder blade stay flush to the spine, or does it wing outwards? And maybe there's 2 things going on. We just need to give them a exercise to strengthen the muscle that keeps their shoulder blade in, and give an exercise to stabilize their ankle. Have them go through that flag position right after they do those exercises, and have them do a warm-up on the wall where they do a couple flags at a time right afterwards, so the motor program is coordinated, and then they're on their way. And so I'm simplifying a little bit with this because there's probably 100 movement patterns that we're looking at.
Absolutely.
But that's the fun part. And then you get to kind of link each one of those. And we were talking about apps before and using some of the technology. I mean, the technology is amazing these days. Like, what you can do. I used to have to see this with my eye and then convince people. I'd have to say, hey, did you know every time you lift your arm up that your shoulder blade is completely off of your spine?
I swear this is happening.
And I have to find mirrors and hold 2 different mirrors and stuff. And now you video it and they're like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now here's the bonus. That's the thing that always helps, is we all have movement deficiencies. So that person, let's say that their shoulder blade is winging away from their spine and they lift their arm up in the air and they had pain. How do we know that that's the reason they have their pain? So what I'll typically do is I'll use what's called symptom modification procedures, but I'll go in and I'll use my hands to create the movement that I want. And in this case, the shoulder blade. So they'll bring their arm up in the air, they'll have their pain. I'll then place my hand against the scapula
So it doesn't wing out.
Yeah, so it doesn't wing out. I'll stabilize it. They'll bring their arm up. And if their pain is gone, well, that's a slam dunk.
Yep.
Right? That's you know that, okay, all we have to do is limit their winging. And that's from strengthening the serratus anterior muscle and then potentially stretching the pec minor muscle and then check. If you go and you see that their scapula is not rotating upwards very well, you go in and you rotate their scapula upwards, their pain goes away. We strengthen upward rotators. Upper trapezius, lower trapezius serratus, we stretch the downward rotators. Levator scapula rhomboids, and this is like, people listening don't have to like absorb this on their heads because I basically just put those all in the protocol. So it's a no-brainer. But the background behind that for me is the fun part.
Yeah. And that's what I appreciate a lot about your book is it's not something I need to constantly be reading. I can just, if someone comes to me and they're like, hey, I think this is happening, I can go to your book and say, okay, what do I need to do? And have some sort of idea of where to take things. If it's a problem, then I'm just sending them to you anyway. But if it's something that they can use your book to work through on their own, or I can help them work through using your book, then I'll try to do that all I can. And
that was really the goal of it. Is there's a diagram in the front that basically has, all right, here's the areas where you're most likely to have your pain.
Right.
If you have pain in this area, go to page 224, or whatever the page is.
Yep.
And it was that goal to not only have someone self-treat and diagnose, but also to have coaches, other medical professionals, and other people just say, all right, here's a guide to climbing, and even non-climbers. You don't know how many people complain to me that like, I'm in Virginia and I have an excellent physical therapist, but they don't know climbing, and they're in these geographic areas. And I wish that I knew every great physical therapist that's a climber geographically.
Right.
But the goal of that book was like, no, on yourself, and for medical professionals that are great that don't climb, here's some context. And then use this to build your structure in your program.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really, really valuable resource for that. So
cool. Well, I'm glad you enjoy it.
I appreciate it a ton, and I've pulled it off the shelf more times than I ever thought I would at first. And so it's become super useful for me.
I wanted to make it too a picture book because I how many like research papers I read each week, but other than research papers, I'm not reading other books,
Right,
and so
right.
I'm like, I want to, and I mean, I'm listening to audiobooks and that's like my cop out, but I'm like, I want to make this like visually, someone can just like look at it, and have people other than myself. Like in my first book, it was myself with my shirt off, like doing all these different poses. I'm like, I gotta move on from that. So people would my first book, I've recently discontinued it. But I had this like band wrapped all around my body and my shirt off.
I remember those photos.
Yeah, it looks like bondage. And so like, I'd be like, I'd be at random place, like climbing outside, and someone would just like go into this pose and just be like laughing. I'd be like, all right, well, at least you're reading some injury prevention content.
They're like, oh, look, the bondage guy.
Yeah, exactly. Man, I did a clinic in Red Rock Rendezvous maybe like, I think it was like 4 years ago. It was the funnest, one of the most fun clinics I ever had, but it was crazy. And all these people were taking all my TheraBands and stuff and beating each other with it and slapping. It was kind of got a little bit crazy. And that's when I realized, okay, I'm gonna have to change the cover of this next book to make it like a little bit more PC. But,
oh, that's amazing. But by the time you've got like edition number 6 out or whatever, we'll have books that just have moving images inside them, so you'll just be able to go through the videos. Will just be in the books.
Wow,
technology is just gonna get there before we know it.
Or books will be discontinued and they'll be like a dinosaur.
It'll just pop up in front of your face in the air and be able to pull up whatever information you want at any moment. Google Air. Yeah, that's what it'll be. I just invented it, so
cool. Well, it's said on the podcast.
I need royalties.
Yeah, exactly. Google Air.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you taking the time out in this craziness of what's going on here and sitting down and kind of working through the rest of the pyramid with me. And I suggest anybody who coaches people, if you're prone to any sort of injury, which you are if you're rock climbing, because everyone I know gets injured in some way, shape, or form if they're trying hard. You should pick up the book, and I mean, it's an amazing resource.
Cool. Thanks for the plug on that.
Yeah.
No, I'm really psyched on it. It's like, I feel that it's my biggest contribution to climbing, just because I want to take whatever was in my brain and all those hours of work and just try and get it out there.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad they are. So thanks, Jared. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I definitely appreciate Jared's total picture view of rehab and prehab. And speaking of prehab, I've seen several people recently on the internet post things like, there's no such thing as prehab. Strength is prehab. Well, I hate to break it to you, but that's contradicting yourself. You just said there's no prehab, and then you said there's prehab. And even the strongest people get hurt, so there must be more to it than just strength. And I think Jared's got a good handle on that, and he's built this system that's really easy to follow. So definitely check out the book, Climb Injury Free. You can find him at theclimbingdoctor.com. There is a link right there in the show notes on your pocket supercomputer for the book. And you can find us at powercompanyclimbing.com. You can find us on the Facebooks, the Instagrams, and the Pinterests at Power Company Climbing. You can find Jared on Twitter. You cannot, however, find us on the Twitter because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
This time, to build power. This time 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 to build